On to our rants and raves, and this week we're going to start with Dan Kennedy.
I have a rave for the students who published the Eagle Eye at the Marjorie Stoneham Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. A couple of months ago, they were criticized for saying that they believed in doing advocacy journalism around gun control. People were saying, whatever happened to objectivity? And you know, as most of us agreed at that time, advocacy journalism can be very useful. Well, they just received the third annual Danny Schechter Global Vision Award for their advocacy work. Danny, of course, started in Boston 50 years ago almost as the news dissector at the old WBCN radio in Boston. So his legacy lives on, and good for these students.
All right, next up we've got Dan Lothian.
Well, taking that theme of advocacy, mine is a rave for the Columbia Journalism Review. They did this great article, I thought, on, and they posed this question, advocates becoming journalists, is that a good thing? And it pointed out, it gave a lot of great detail about how the ACLU and other non-governmental organizations are creating their own newsrooms, and they're doing investigative journalism, if you will. Now, this isn't anything new. You know, for years there have been various environmental groups who have been going out and getting hidden camera stuff and doing investigations. But now you have this pipeline by which they can be their own networks and really get it out there very quickly. The point that I think is a little, you have to be cautious with, is that there is, when you look at investigative journalism, the main purpose is to inform the public about something that is going on behind the scenes they may not know about. For these advocates, it's about shifting policy. It's very deliberate in what they're doing, and that's kind of what drives them. The article doesn't come down and say, you know, this is a good, this is a bad thing. I think it sort of goes right down the middle and says, you know, there's a lot that you can gain from these advocates, and that you can, you know, journalists can, especially as newsrooms are shrinking, there are a lot of holes, and they can fill some of the gaps. But it was one of those things, you need to pay attention to this, because everything that's out there that looks like it's pure and clean isn't coming from journalism, so to speak. It can be coming from these groups.
I've noticed that some of the organizations, like you're talking about, the ACLU, for example, they have very sophisticated media operations. I mean, the packaging is better in many cases than a lot of news organizations. Yeah. My sense is that they still rely, and I could be wrong, I'd love to get your collective take on this, I feel like they still rely on an established traditional news organization to process the information for readers or viewers or listeners, to give it the sort of stamp of legitimacy. But maybe I'm wrong about that.
Well, it's shifting. It's shifting, though, because some of these organizations are now hiring people from the New York Times or hiring people from ABC News. And then when they bring in those editors, they're going out and hiring some of their friends from the network. So they're creating, you know, this new entity where they don't have to rely on established journalists to spread the message.
If you've got social media distribution, you can do it and run around that traditional publication distribution and get it out in front of eyeballs. Yeah, medium.
You actually get the next rant.
All right, yes. I have a rave, and it's actually about traditional mainstream journalism doing work that advocacy groups would probably be happy with. This is a rave for Liz Goodwin, who is fairly new to the Washington Bureau of the Boston Globe, and did a terrific piece last Sunday that really went viral that was about the treatment of children of some of these migrants who are seeking asylum, and what happens to them when they get to Texas and they get taken away from their parents and they get sent to, you know, the foster family with the parents not having any way of getting in touch with them. It had this killer detail that really went around the globe about how sometimes people take the kids away and tell the parents they're getting a bath, and then they just never come back. So again, you know,
that's been everywhere.
Yes, yes, and terrific reporting on the ground. And you know, there are a lot of hot takes in this internet that we've been raving about in the age of Trump. And you know, I think what really moves the needle in terms of policy is just hard and fast classic reporting.
Yep. Very nice. It's my turn, right? Or no, you had another. Yeah, I'm sorry, I totally lost this part.
That's okay.
Lylah Alphonse, would you like to rant or rave?
I would like to rave.
Rave away.
For 3 journalists in yesterday's absolutely insane White House briefing. Jim Acosta from CNN, who asked Sarah Huckabee Sanders about the Bible verse that Jeff Sessions is using to justify removing children from their families at the border, and then who followed up with asking her whether it was a moral thing to do. Paula Reed from CBS News, who fact-checked and corrected Sanders on the spot, pointing out that there is no law on the U.S. books mandating that children be removed from their
Contrary
parents.
to what the president has repeatedly said.
Exactly, contrary to the spin, and pointed out that this is happening because there's been a choice made to prosecute anyone showing up at the border without a visa as a criminal rather than treating it as a civil matter. And then to Brian Krim, who is the executive editor of the Sentinel newspapers in Maryland and also a White House correspondent from Playboy, for kind of horrifyingly bringing it home and asking Sanders, and by extension, everyone in the room, everyone watching, whether she has empathy for these children.
Let me give a compliment to yours. In closing, I have a very brief rant for Steve Doocy of Fox News and Friends. I don't expect a lot from Steve Doocy, and yet he managed to fall underneath my expectations for him today. When President Trump talked about how he loves that when Kim Jong-un's people sit up straight for him, and Trump said he'd like his people to do the same, Steve Doocy followed up with this ridiculous statement. Well, so he has fired some of his generals. Of course, we all know Kim Jong-un has done much worse. When you have a chance to question the president about his seeming authoritarian leanings, you got to do a hell of a lot better than Steve Doocy did.